من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعد الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, ever merciful. O ye who believe, avoid most of suspicions, for suspicion in some cases is a sin. And spy not, nor backbite one another. Would any of you like to eat the flesh of his brother who is dead? Certainly you would loathe it. And fear Allah. Surely Allah is oft returning with compassion and is merciful. O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female, and we have made you into tribes and sub-tribes that you may recognize one another. Verily, the most honorable among you in the sight of Allah is he who is the most righteous among you. Surely, Allah is all-knowing, all-aware.
Jazakallah, Brother Ikan. And I'll now request our Brother Naji to just familiarize our viewers with, our audience with Zoom, how you can raise your hands, ask questions, just so that you'll be comfortable throughout the meeting. So, Brother Naji.
Alaikum, Jazakallah, Rabbi Sahab. Just to go over a quick couple of technical notes for everyone before we get started. Inshallah, today we'll be taking questions throughout the session via the chat box. And so again, if you want to send in a question, if you have a point to add to the discussion in the beginning parts of the conversation, you can go ahead and send it via the chat box, and our admin team and Rabbi Sahab will be hosting, will be keeping an eye out for them. Just for anyone who doesn't know how to use the chat box, I'll just give a quick tutorial for that. You'll click the chat option. It's in the bottom of your screen next to participant. It's the speaking bubble, and you can click that option and the chat box should appear and you'll type it. Just to keep a note to everybody that these questions will appear only to the panelists. So just keep that in mind, that all the panelists will be able to see the questions as they come in. The last note for everyone is that it'll be easier for us if all the participants keep their videos off throughout the session. Otherwise, we'll have to manually turn them off. So if everyone can, just keep your videos off, and that'll be appreciated. Other than that, inshallah, looking forward to the program, and I'll hand it back to Rabbi Sahab.
Jazakallah. So we'll go straight into it. This program, we will be discussing, racial relations. We all know what's going on in the United States of America. It's a long, long history of a lot of things that have been happening. We have three main panelists here with us who are going to enlighten us a little bit about the history, will tell us about the current situation and possible solutions. From a police officer, our brother Itizaz, who is actually on duty right now in DC, is our brother. And I would also tell you from the get-go, he's here personally volunteering. He's not speaking on behalf of the police department, he's speaking personally. as far as his feelings are concerned and on what he's experiencing, what his thoughts are. We also have Abdullah Thomas, who is in Jacksonville at the moment, Orlando. He is an educator by profession. He'll also give us a very interesting perspective as far as this topic is concerned. And we have our respected missionary as well, Ahmad Sahib, who is in the North Carolina area at the moment. He's a missionary of the Ahmadiyya Jamaat. And he'll also give us from the Islamic perspective, the spiritual perspective, how we can look at this problem that we all will agree that is a problem. I'll begin with Abdullah Thomas, yourself. If you can just kind of start the conversation with, how would you describe what's going on in the United States of America as far as the Black experience is concerned? Because this is something right now we're talking about, you know, George Floyd, who got killed unjustly. What would you explain what the Black people are going through in this country at the moment?
All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, Murabi Saab. And before I begin, I just want to really just reach out and thank the Majlis for creating this space for us to have this conversation. I know, you know, I've been a part of the Jamaat and Majlis for 8 years, alhamdulillah, and we've never really had this opportunity to speak so candidly, so frankly, and honestly about situations like this. I know in 2014, with Freddie Gray and what was going on in Ferguson, you know, we had some guidance from our beloved Huzur about what to do, what not to do. And there was minimal Majlis or Jamaat response. Nevertheless, fast forward 6 years later, we're confronting this head on. And I think it, you know, takes a lot of bravery and a lot of courage to do this. So I just want to, you know, recognize the Jamaat and the Majlis for their growth and just thank everyone for that. Secondly, I want to talk about, you know, there are 43 million Black people, Black Americans, and out of those, so there's 43 million ways to be Black, right? So I'm going to speak from my personal individual perspective, and then I'm going to speak, you know, generally from what I see, you know. So I've been an educator for 11 years, and I've worked for Black administrators, serving with Black, you know, teachers, serving Black people for the majority of my time in 11 years. So I'm going to speak very generally and specifically about that. So just to start off, you know, what the Black experience is right now, it's the same as it's always been since 1619, right? In my humble opinion, in my experience, you know, from the first slaves that were brought to America in 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia, right? It's the same thing. But there has been a trajectory over the past 400 years, and things have changed, and immorality and oppression has shifted over these past 400 years. So the essence remains, you know, of imposing immorality and imposing, you know, imposing immorality and then imposing this other problem that's taking place here in the United States right now. So the essence still remains. So the Black experience, it's immersed in perseverance, it's immersed in growth, in overcoming, and really overcoming what's been laid before us as a Black community. But again, on the other side, there's fear, there's angst, there's anxiety, there's frustration, as we see, you know, going on in the United States right now. So that's the perspective.
Thank you for that. I mean, you've laid it out beautifully. We also know that the problem that's going on right now, and I'll come to Aji, it is something that has to do directly with police officers who are involved. And as Abdullah has mentioned, it's something that has been happening. But right now, what really kicked things off was a certain incident, right? So a lot of things are being said about policing, about police officers. You know, you have your own personal views. You're an Ahmadi Muslim. I know me and you are friends. I'm Black. And you have a lot of Black people who are friends. You know, you have family, there's media, there's a lot going on. So I just wanted to share with us, as a police officer who also has his own personal views, but you're also professional, how do you really feel? I mean, if you want to be vulnerable for a second, how do you really feel about some of the sentiments that are being shared about policing in the United States at this point in time?
Assalamu alaikum. So essentially, obviously, like what has happened is like very, very disturbing, very appalling.
That's been very tough to see, you know, the industry be put under this type of stress. But I will say that as an Ahmadi Muslim, you know, post Ferguson, 2014, I know Brother Hay Thomas brought that up, that a lot of things happened in this country. Well, 2014 was also when I went to Hazur, the Khalifa of the time, and I presented myself from my waqf. And I explained to Hazur what I had been studying, and Hazur said to me, I want you to go into policing. In my head, I was like, at this time, you know, like, you want me to go into policing post-Ferguson, post-Freddie Gray? No one in their right mind would want to go into this field. But I did what, you know, like, I did what I have been raised to do, what the Jamaat has inculcated inside of me, and that is to hear and obey. And I stepped up, I did it, I came back, I started applying, and alhamdulillah, I got into Washington, D.C.'s police department, the nation's capital. And I can't speak on whatever's happening in the rest of the country. I can't speak on the different police departments in the different cities, the townships, the counties. I can only speak.
For the record, they are kind of different.
Yes, 100% different. There isn't any regulatory standard across the board. And, you know, that's, you know, we can get into that later of how that is an issue. And that's also a potential part of reform that can take place. But what I want to say is that I can speak on my experience here serving the Black community in the southeast and northeast of Washington, D.C. I've been working for the past 6 years, and I've extensively been positioned in those areas. I've worked very closely with young juvenile, male and females, and adults, old and young. I've served 1.5 years, 2 years in general patrol, so I responded to regular service calls and those type of things. But now I work in a specialized capacity. So seeing everything that's going on, you know, I see the protests, I see the sentiments that a lot of people from our own Jamaat are having, and it hurts because these are people that I know that are painting a very broad paint stroke amongst all of the departments across the country that I've heard the term being thrown around that it's not just a few bad apples, it's the whole orchard. Mm-hmm. But my experience here, I've worked in a specialized unit where last year we recovered 589 guns. 589 guns. And I can tell you that there were 0 police-involved shootings. So the violence is here. The violence is in a lot of these inner city communities. And the issue that I believe is being washed over is at the core of these societies, that these societies need more attention from the government. Okay. And by just blaming,
I'll come back to that. I mean, Jazakallah, thank you so much for sharing that. Coming to our third panelist, Brother Hamad, who's a missionary, give us a little bit of a background. We know that if we take a step back, we're talking about, you know, Black people being persecuted in this country, as Abdullah has talked about it from a long time ago up to this day, right? From the Holy Quran, from Islamic teachings, from religious teachings. Is this something that's new? Is it something that has been going on? Is it acknowledged anywhere in the Holy Quran?
Yeah, absolutely. Assalamu alaikum. Absolutely. You know, this problem of oppression, persecution, of enslavement of an entire people is something that is endemic throughout all of humanity. You know, even the Quran speaks about this. The Quran speaks about how the Bunnies, the children of Israel, were enslaved by the Egyptians for hundreds of years. For hundreds of years, they were oppressed, they were persecuted, they were enslaved, they had no rights in that society. And it was only when Allah sent Hazrat Musa والسلام, that these people were given their liberation and freedom. You know, the Quran speaks about Asaba, the people of the caves, these early Christians who in the first 300 years had no rights, were persecuted, they were oppressed, and they were forced to live underground because of how badly they were oppressed. And this lasted for 300 years, and it was only after those hundreds of years that they were able to come out and live freely in society and be given those rights. You know, so we find that this is an issue that is inherent in us as a people, as human beings. We oppress other people when we gain power. You know, as Ahmadi Muslims, we can relate to this as well. You know, as Ahmadi Muslims today are persecuted, oppressed all over the world. In any Muslim majority country, Ahmadis have next to no rights. In Pakistan, we're an oppressed people. They're literally almost, at least figuratively, living in caves. You can't be out in the open as an Ahmadi. In Middle Eastern countries, Ahmadis cannot have legally registered organizations, nizams, movements, any of these things. And so this is something that is inherent in humanity. And this is something that our African American brothers and sisters are also suffering with. Black people are also oppressed and persecuted, and I've been enslaved for centuries. And as Abdullah Thomas said, that this was not just slavery that was hundreds of years ago. This slavery went from 1619 and continues today in different forms. Just the form has changed, but this is something that we find is inherent in humanity, and that's the struggle that we have to reach out and try to correct through our Islamic teachings.
So I think what you're telling us here is that history has shown that when a people come in power, they tend to just pounce on somebody. So it's nothing new. It's been with us, for centuries. I mean, for thousands of years. I think that's really important to put out there, so people just understand that, we just become selfish somehow. It's part of our history. It's part of us as human beings. We all can agree that, George Floyd was killed in an unjust manner. I don't think anybody here would try to say that, no, it was okay to kill a human being like that. Forget about their race for a second. All of us can agree that this was unjust. Millions of people, not only in the United States, reacted to this. So when you come to reactions, I mean, how do we react to things like this? When you're oppressed, and Abdullah, I'll come to you. What we've seen is, even in Syria, even in, war-torn Syria, people came out and they're kind of protesting, in Africa, in Europe, here. When we look at protesting, why protesting? I mean, there's different ways of dealing with problems, but if you can kind of just give us from that perspective of those who feel the need to go out there, why protesting?
I mean, protesting is just a natural impulsive response, right? When you're constantly backed up in the corner over and over and over again, I mean, essentially you got to come out swinging. And I'm not saying that I condone that by any means, but I do understand where that's coming from. Martin Luther King Jr. said, the language of the oppressed is this rebellion, or is this rioting? So, this is a rebellion that's taking place, and we're actually seeing the system being torn down right before our eyes. And this is an incredible opportunity for Ahmadiyya Islam to step in. But to go back, just to answer, to elaborate a little bit more on the first question, it's important to understand what this is, right? What we're talking about. We're not talking about slavery necessarily, right? We're talking about the transformation of it. And in this regard, right now in present day and time, we are looking at state-sponsored executions of Black Americans, and there's no repercussions and no consequences with the state. And it's not holistic, right? But it's happening more than it should be. So that's the first thing that needs to be addressed. And I hope that we can continue to look through that lens, as we continue the conversation. The second piece that's incredibly important is, why is the Black community being held to a higher standard than the state and the government? That's why the Black community is incredibly enraged right now. And it's almost, you feel despair. So if anyone's ever dealt with any sort of racism or experienced racism, I'm sure all of us have in one way, shape, or form here, being in the United States, you feel it's almost like you either want to cry or you want to fight, right? Those are the two options that you have. You feel complete hopelessness and despair, or you feel complete blind rage. And somehow, some way, the Black community is being told to manage this feeling time and time and time and time and time again. And that's unjust within itself. And that's something that needs to be addressed. When it comes to peace officers, when it comes to police officers, the whole point is to de-escalate and to find conflict resolution. Right. And before I move on, I'll let you take it. I just have a question I want everyone to think about, right? Let's imagine that a high school or middle school teacher gets into a physical fight with one of their students, high school or middle student. Who's at fault? The student or the teacher?
Okay, that's a rhetorical question. I'll let the audience think about that. Coming back to just some of the things that were said, and you really said something interesting here. You said it's a state-sponsored. I mean, that's a big thing to say. Just to piggyback off of that, the president did say that when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And this is a statement that's not new. I mean, it was coined in 1967 by a Miami police officer who was known for aggressive police tactics against, Black communities. So, but the president on his own credit did deny that he took it from there. He just said it. He didn't know where it came from. But, the keeping these things in mind, keeping these kind of statements in mind, and I'll come to, Ajit. People do say this, and I'm just, echoing this, what people say. Is there, you being a police officer, would you deny, or not that you have to defend the police department, that does it look like it's state sponsored? If a president is going to say something like that, that when the looting starts, the shooting is going to start, right? And just seeing how police officers are getting away with things like this over and over again, being defended by a system, what would be your arguments about that?
I would say that essentially we have to focus on who is making these policies, who is setting these laws, who is doing the oversight over these departments. And in each state, in each locality, whatever laws, not laws, but policies that a department has, they're called general orders or departmental orders. Those orders are approved or disapproved by attorney generals, U.S. Attorney's Office, and judges. So those type of things are what we need to bring to the forefront and educate people that these decisions, this oversight on these departments are being made by attorneys, by judges, who during all this protest, while officers are out here dealing with the aftermath, they're at home. They're in their offices or wherever, relaxing, have a cup of tea, sipping their tea or whatever it is. But they aren't being held responsible for the oversight that they had during these procedures. And I will admit that a lot of departments, their policies are outdated. And that's the least to say, for lack of a better words.
But it's affecting real people, though. If they're outdated and it's affecting real people, don't you think they're letting it happen?
Well, I can't say for that, because I can only speak from what's happening in my department here. And we've been ahead of the ball. We've had body cameras for years now. A lot of our policies do have oversight. There's an official police complaint entity that operates outside of the department, run by non-police personnel. And it's so strict that even if, let's say, for an example, an officer were to say a curse word off the scene away from a citizen, you get in trouble for that. So I can only speak about my department and provide the experiences from that. And I can say that, we're doing it right here. And I think acknowledging where it's being done correctly, it's very hard to say that right now. But the examples that I'm giving, the number of gun recoveries, the amount of work that I've personally done, been involved with, this type of violence and this type of stuff is still going on. It's the policies, the laws, those are things that need to be brought to the forefront. We need to vote out those people who are making these attorneys, attorney generals, these electable positions. Judges in a lot of places have immunity. They can make a decision and not be able to get sued. Like, these are things that people are unaware of.
So I'll push back a little bit on that while we go into the conversation. I know that, we'll have to give credit to the police officers for doing their job, for protecting people. To be honest, that's what they're supposed to do anyway. So, whether we praise them for that or not, they deserve our respect for that. But here we're talking about innocent people who are dying in the hands of police officers. And it's kind of being allowed by those people not being held accountable, right? But Hamad Saab, we've seen in America that this is something that it leads to a big problem. If you see a problem, you don't deal with it, it leads to problems like what America is facing now. Within Muslim communities, Christian, religious communities, or let's be specific, within the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, do you see signs of these kind of privileges, that people may have because they find themselves in the majority, and they're certain members of that same group less because maybe they don't realize it, maybe they do? How do you think that that's happening, and how can we address that, or should we even address it?
Absolutely. And, before I directly answer the question, I kind of want to rephrase or reframe it a bit. I don't want to say that, yes, there's racism within the Jamaat, because then that makes it seem like the Jamaat is racist. The Jamaat, by the grace of Allah, is not racist. Our teaching, our Nizam, Islam, Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, Muslim, Khulafa, there's nothing racist in that. But what happens is the Jamaat is a beautiful Jamaat. It's made up of Pakistanis, of white people, of black people, of Arabs, of Asians, of people from all over the world, and all cultures and all ethnicities. Now, when all of these people come together in one Jamaat, one community, and yes, it's a spiritual community that has a beautiful teaching, but this teaching does not permeate to the deepest level of the hearts of every single person. So some people will bring to the Jamaat their own cultural baggage, their own preconceived, sometimes racist notions. And so when these Jamaat members, you can say kind of the lower rung, the lower class members who don't have that high spirituality, that high understanding of what Islam Ahmadiyya is about, they will bring that racism towards their interactions with other Jamaat members. And so in this way, we can say that, yes, there is a level of racism that exists amongst the Jamaat members, and we cannot deny it. We can't beat around the bush. We have to address it head on if we want to get ahead of it and nip it in the bud. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Rabi Rahmatullah alayh, we talk about this in 2020. We're talking about this now, as Abdullah Thomas said, after George Floyd, we finally now have the guts to talk about this. Khalifa Rabi in 1987, and I'm sure all of you have heard this or read this sermon. If you haven't, you should read it at least, or give it a listen in the Urdu. He addressed, it's called the Detroit Address. And he mentioned very bluntly and very directly that amongst the Pakistani Ahmadis who migrated to America, he's saying, I see a level of racism amongst you. And then he pinpoints the reason of that racism. He pinpoints the cause. He says, yes, there may be white supremacists. There may be white people who have so much wealth and have everything, and they look down upon black people because they've enslaved them for generations. Right. It's not right. It's absolutely wrong. There's no justification for it, but at least they have some wealth to stand on. They have some power based on which they're enslaving on other people. But he says what Pakistanis do is they come here and they suffer from an inferiority complex. And they think to themselves, we don't want to be like black people. We want to be like white people. We're closer to white people. We want their wealth. And so in order to bring themselves closer to white people out of a horrible inferiority complex, they then start trampling over black people. These Pakistanis will then start looking down upon African Americans and say they're poor, they have no education, all of these things. And this was what Khalifa Rabi called out more than 30 years ago in 1987. And he said, this is wrong. He said the comments were made to him that the mistake Ahmadiyya made, or Ahmadi missionaries made in the early years, was that instead of preaching to white people, we preached to black people. And Khalifa Rabi was so offended at this comment. He said when Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahib was preaching, he did not differentiate. He was preaching to whoever came and accepted the message, and it was the African Americans who accepted. When Hazrat Muslim Maud was getting these reports, he was not questioning are they white or black. Everyone was happy at the fact these amazing souls were coming to Islam and Ahmadiyya. Khalifa Rabi mentioned in that sermon that I meet these people, these African Americans, and their heart is full of the light of Ahmadiyya. These are spiritual, godly people who offer their tahajjud. Right. And so Khalifa Rabi pinpointed this, and he said this does exist. And the sad thing is that 33, 34 years later, we're still sitting here talking about it like it's a new problem. But we haven't addressed it for 30 years when one of our Khulafa told us to address it years ago. Right. And so this is, the reality that we have to face as Jamaat members, as well as that we have to call this out and teach this to one another. Yourself, Dibba Sahib, you're a black Ahmadi and you know Urdu. And you yourself have told us these stories sometimes of these Pakistanis who don't know that you know Urdu, will say these things in Urdu about you right in front of you, not knowing you understand in their racist comments. There was an African American, I'm not going to mention his name, but he knows Urdu as well. And he mentioned the story once that at a jalsa, he was walking towards Langar Khana, towards the eating area. And everyone was rushing. And these Pakistanis ran in front of him, kind of went ahead of him in line. And they made a comment in Urdu, not knowing he understands, saying like, oh, khara wo kala hai. They said that, oh, it's okay, it's not a big deal. He's just black. We can go ahead of him. That African American heard this. And he just said to them in Urdu, he responded, he said, Is kale ko bhi bhook lag jati hai. He said, this black person also gets hungry. I'm still a human being. So these are the kind of comments that people still make in our Jamaat. And again, the racism can come from any culture, but as a Pakistani, I speak from my perspective, and I see this among fellow Pakistanis, that we make these racist comments to fellow African American Ahmadis or African Ahmadis. And this is something that is not right, and we have to address it, and we have to teach our membership. And where it begins, I believe, is with the youth. It's with the kids. Over the last weekend, I held these sessions with Atfal and Asat in Atlanta. 2 days we had these sessions. And it was amazing to see that these kids, I didn't need to tell them anything. They themselves were way more anti-racist than anyone else out there. These Pakistani kids, these African kids were completely livid at what's going on. And that's something that gave me hope, knowing that our future generation is not just not racist, they're anti-racist. The problem really is in some of our older generation. And that's a generation that's a struggle to teach them and to show them that it's wrong to make these comments. It's wrong to look down upon Black people or any people. But you know, the issue here is Black people in America, and they're the people who are suffering racism the most in America.
I'm really glad you addressed that. And we can see that questions are coming in, and within the panelists as well. If you want to jump in, you know, cross talk at any point, you know, please feel free to do so. And I'll come to you, Abdullah. Just piggyback off of what you know, the acknowledgement that he just made. We know that people do react when they're pushed to the wall, when you know, when they just can't take it anymore. As you mentioned that too. You know, some might be violent and others might use civil ways of, you know, going through the ballots, or as Aji has said, when it comes to electing those officials, we need to take more responsibility. Some people tend to think that Black people in America are only reactive. When somebody gets killed, they all come out, they protest, they break things, they loot, and then they go back to, you know, sleep and don't do anything until somebody else gets killed. Just educate us a little bit, Abdullah. What else is it that the Black community is doing to try to bring about change, you know, to change the plight of their own people?
All right, I want to just extend a little bit of what Murabi Hamid said, right, regarding the Jamaat isn't racist by any means. Nevertheless, there are pockets, right, of racism that exists.
Right.
And so if any of those brothers and sisters are on this call, right, we have the Khalifatul Masih, Sonny, the Hazrat Muslim Maud, Radiallahu Anhu, the fourth Khalifa, the fifth Khalifa, they have all recognized that systemic oppression is a real thing in the United States. Here in one of the sermons, or in one of the books that Hazrat Muslim Maud, Radiallahu Anhu, wrote, it's called The Future of Turkey and the Responsibility of Muslims. He talks specifically about the Black plight in the United States. Khalifa Rabi, you know, delivered the Detroit address. He also gave multiple responses in his question and answer sessions. One specifically, if I'm not mistaken, November 18th of 1995, where he says very clearly that the United States has very cleverly created a system to keep Black people as third or fourth rate citizens. So I admonish those South Asian brothers and sisters who don't believe systemic racism is real. Your Khulafa has made the call. They have determined that it is real. So it's important that you align your opinion to their opinion, because there's only one opinion, and that is of the Khulafa, right?
Yes.
So that's a part of being obedient. So I wanted to make that point regarding that. Now, as far as what Black people are doing, a lot of people think that we just sit back and wait for things to happen. As you mentioned, Murabi Dibba, that is not the truth, right? Our history as Black Americans doesn't reside in victimhood. And that's the word that a lot of people say, that we're victims, we play victim. And that's not the case, right? If you look at our trajectory and you look at the history of Black Americans, it's one simply of perseverance. And that perseverance continues to happen even in the face, even if you kick our anthill down, right? Over again, you know, the government and the state has destroyed multiple Black cities, Tulsa, Rosewood, cities in St. Louis in the 1900s. I mean, the list goes on and on. The counterintelligence program that was sent to disrupt any sort of Black movement, something that's happened to Black Lives Matter, by the way, because you have protesters, then you have provocateurs, paid agents, and then you have young people who are just riding the wave, who want to get a gold chain and some J's. You know, that's just the reality of the situation. But going back to everything, the Black community doesn't play victimhood. We're simply asking for acknowledgement and recompense. I mean, even the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 179, it talks about blood money, right? Where if you kill somebody, you're supposed to pay blood money back. That recompense has never been given. And that's one of the discussions that's talked about now with regard to reparations. We're not asking for reparations for slavery. We're asking for reparations because of the trajectory of the oppression that took place. If original slaves, right, the people who were emancipated in 1865, if they were given recompense and intergenerational wealth was able to pass from generation to generation, we wouldn't even be having this discussion about reparations right now. Mm-hmm. What we're just trying to bring up is, hey, recompense, seek forgiveness for what you did, repent for what you did, and then we can move forward. But going to answer your original question, Murabi Saab, regarding what we're doing in the Black community, I mean, the Black community is incredibly active within the school systems, within programs that's going on. And there are some prominent names that should be brought up. One is Dr. Eve Ewing. She's you know, an activist, a community activist in Chicago who does immense work to bring back, you know, everything that's been cut from the budget regarding mental health, you know, extracurricular activities, so on and so forth. In your city, you know, Marabi Dibba, there's a gentleman we talked about. His name is Maj Toure. He created an organization called Black Guns Matter. And it's all about teaching youth who carry weapons, because I'm in education, 100% of my students carry weapons.
Mm.
Right?
So it's already out there. It's already out there, right?
It's already out there. So I tell them, if you're gonna own weapon, I understand it's important to own a weapon and have self-protection. Do it the right way. Own it properly. You know, get your concealed weapons license and understand to de-escalate and have conflict resolution. That's what this brother from Black Guns Matter does. His name is Maj Toure. You have the Black conservative movement. The Black conservative movement is something that I've been studying for about a month now. Incredible what they're doing for the Black community. There's people, Sonny Johnson, Felicia Killings, Asham, I think his last name is Shaket. I mean, if you go on Twitter and you start following a few of these people, you'll see what's being done in the Black community. The work is immense. It's just overshadowed.
I'm sure. Rabbi Hamad, coming back to you, we do know that you talked about other nations have been oppressed. We do know that you talked about this has been going on. Human beings just do this to each other. But looking at the plight of Black people who are saying that, look, we tried peaceful protests, we tried most of these things, and Abdullah has just mentioned some of the things that are happening, but there seems to be something that just stands in our way all the time. You know, like, I'm sure a lot of people on this call don't know about half of the things that Abdullah just mentioned, some of the civic efforts that Black people are doing in this country, but they're not even known. How are you supposed to join you know, an effort that you don't even know about? Maybe they don't have access to the media. Maybe, I don't know what it is. When there's that frustration and they seem to think nothing is working, anytime we are listened to is when we protest, right? Or when we break things, really. What do you say to that? Give us some insights as to what Islam says about this, you know, protesting or riots or whatever it is that you may call it, and patience.
Exactly. Before I get to that question, I just want to go back to my earlier comments. Somebody sent me a private message. I just want to qualify that my previous comments that I made was not that every Pakistani is racist. It's not that the Jamaat is full of racist Pakistanis and everyone out there is like this. There's just a certain segment of these. These are the people who Farabi was addressing, the reason why he gave a full sermon on this in '87. And this is just, these certain people still do exist. It doesn't mean every Pakistani is like that, but some of us are like that. And when even 2, 3, 4, 5 of us are like that in a Jamaat, then that ruins the environment for everyone. And then even 2, 3 people like that are enough to drive away some African Americans. So my intent was not to say the Jamaat is a racist Jamaat, or that all of us Pakistanis are racist. By the grace of Allah, many of us are not. Many of us fully do understand the beauty and the light of Islam and Ahmadiyyat and realize the anti-racism of Islam and Ahmadiyyat. And that's why we're a true Jamaat. That's why we have Khilafat, because most of us are on this beautiful teaching. So again, to that person who messaged me as well, I wanted to address this, that this wasn't a blanket. I'm glad you did. It wasn't blanket. It was a specific people are like this, and it's a minority, but we have to address that minority in order to make sure this doesn't become a bigger issue than it actually is, or than it actually can become, or as it is in the wider American society. Now, as to your issue of you know, what can we actually, how do we peacefully protest patiently? Now, you know, it's a very good question that you ask, and the things that Abdullah Thomas mentioned, you know, I didn't know about those either. And I think that's part of the problem. The problem is that there isn't this awareness about this mobilization, about this strategization, about this organization that's occurring in the Black community. You see, now, on the one hand, I'm going to make a couple of comments here. On the one hand, when Black people do loot or riot or create chaos and destruction study, number one is that, you know, I'm not a Black person, so I don't know what it's like to be a Black person in America. I can never claim that. I never will come close to claiming that. But all I can say is when I see what's happening, when I read it, when I hear it, my blood boils. And I can say safely, my blood only boils only a fraction of a percent of what any average Black person's blood must be boiling right now. So all I can say is I completely empathize and I understand and I see the anger and frustration. And there's every right to be that angry. There's every right to be that frustrated. You know, nobody's saying you shouldn't be. Nobody's saying that nobody should be frustrated. Of course, we're all frustrated. Black people have the most right to be angry and frustrated right now. The issue, I think, more is that what does violence and looting and chaos bring? I think that's kind of the issue that our Khulafa have been addressing, that our President Huzur has addressed in his latest sermon as well, is that this doesn't really bring anything either. They don't even listen to it. They will not listen to us even when we create violence. We even look through history and we find that when these protests, when these chaos, when these rioting occurred, yes, they did create changes. We're not going to deny that. I'm not going to deny that either. And I don't think anyone can deny that. Yes, there can be some good that comes out of violence and protesting in this way when it seems like every other avenue has failed. You know, that's true. You know, the civil rights movement, all these protests, they did bring some positive changes, and we can't deny that. Yet at the end of the day, when we also look at it objectively and we look through history, we find, yes, rioting and looting and protesting brought some positive changes. But if they truly brought lasting systemic changes, we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't be sitting here having this discussion in 2020. If they brought systemic changes, George Floyd would not have died. Freddie Gray would not have died. Michael Brown would not have died. Trayvon Martin would not have died. You know, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, none of these people would have died if these protests and rioting and looting actually brought systemic changes. The fact is that they didn't bring the change that was the original intention or desire. All that happened was that a lot of violence, protesting occurred. The rich white man on top saw this and said, yes, let's just appease them, change the form of slavery, make them seem like we're going to make changes, but no changes were actually made. You know, slavery ended. Yes, Abraham Lincoln ended slavery with a stroke of a pen. But then what ended up happening? Slavery changed form. Jim Crow laws came out, you know, just to suppress black people. Over time, again, you know, these rioting, the looting civil rights movement comes up. And then, yes, some changes were made, but then what happened? There's the whole prison industrial complex. There's mass incarceration of African American and black people that happens. These are all different ways in which the systemic racism has never been addressed. You know, so yes, we can raise our voices through looting and rioting and chaos and destruction, and I get that feeling. I mean, I can't say I fully get it, but I empathize with that. But history has shown that it hasn't brought in the fully lasting systemic change that's actually needed. Right. And so this kind of establishes that really isn't the best option to bring forth systemic change. So what is the best option? You know, when we look through history, and again, there's a couple of points I do want to mention here, is that, again, we can take inspiration from the Bunnies, right? We can take inspiration from Asaba. We can take inspiration even from the Ahmadiyya Jamaat today, and how Huzur is teaching us to deal with persecution. And the number one thing he's saying is turn to Allah and beg to Allah. You know, all of the frustration, all of the anger, everything that we have in our hearts, if instead of using that in expression that destroys, use that in our prayers, use that in turning to our Creator, and we as a spiritual people, as a Jamaat, as a community that believes in Allah, have to have faith that our Allah listens to this. Allah listens to prayers. He sees injustice. He sees that, and He will correct His injustice like He did with Bani Israel, like He did with the Asaba, and like He will do with the Ahmadiyya community as well. You know, Huzur said that once in a sermon, that Allah told them in a vision or a dream that if every Ahmadi prayed for the end of persecution, Allah would end it in one night. That's the power of prayer. And so if we also all turn to Allah for the end of this injustice of African American people and their slavery and oppression, then miracles can be brought forth through this turning to Allah as well. And that should be one of our messages we bring out, is to actually enforce that all people who are part of this Black Lives Matter and who empathize with the oppression of black people, let's turn to Allah and ask Allah to end the injustice. So that's number one. Number two is that along with this, Huzur has been saying that there should be peaceful protests. There should be some way systemically within the law that we bring about changes. This means, you know, again, Killer Mike said the same thing in Atlanta: strategize, mobilize, organize. You know, this is the way to bring about these systemic changes. Is that, you know, I'm going to bring up this point from Khalifa Sonny. He says in his speech in Kiki, in Real Revolution, he explains how real revolutions can have lasting impact. He says, yes, there can be individual moments, individual movements, but they're all uncoordinated. They're all chaotic. They don't result or lead to anything. But when you want to supplant the one order, when you want to actually do away with one order, you have to establish another system. You have to be organized and you have to be unified. And so this is what it will take, is for everyone to become organized, unified, systematically motivated to go forward and have an actual system or order through which we will supplant and remove the old system. So Khalifa Rabbi in a sermon once, he explained, I'm going to give an analogy here of nare. You know, sometimes in speeches, we get so motivated, we start giving nare, and we get emotional and we get energetic. Now, what happens? Khalifa Rabbi once mentioned this in a sermon in 82 or 83, and he said that, you know, all of you are giving these nare, but I don't want you to waste your energy here. This is all temporary emotion. You're going to waste all your energy here, and Ahmadiyya does not want people of temporary emotion. Yes, you're here, you're motivated, you're energetic, but then go home and use that energy for something productive. Implement these teachings in your lives. And so in that same way, these rallies and protests, yes, they're good. As individuals, we can and should participate in the peaceful ones. But they're like the nades we give in a speech. They motivate us, they give us energy, they give us emotion. But if we just leave it there, like we give a nade in a speech and go home and make no change, if we just leave that rally and come home, then there's no change, nothing has happened.
Right.
But if we use those rallies to actually motivate ourselves, and we actually use those rallies to gather and mobilize ourselves, and then after that, we take step 2. And we actually, like the things Abdullah Thomas mentioned, we actually bring those things to wide public knowledge, that these are the ways in which the Black community, or all of us, whoever is part of this movement, you don't have to be Black, but
Right.
anyone who wants this change to occur, if we all unify under those ideas and under that organization, and we all go forward with this, then we can bring a change. For example, this campaign.
I'm gonna step to Aji there for a second. You have a question from the audience, and I'm gonna tie it in with specifically about policing. We know that social researchers they've used the term a closed system, and this is when little external oversight and loyalty is highly prized in the police. I mean, it's something they're generalizing. Loyalty is big. If one officer crosses the line, others will back him up or back her up. Without
Sure.
the incident, it often comes down to just the statements between a police officer and then somebody who's already a criminal. Having, like Ahmad Sahab has said, no matter how much a people unite, now if this is what they're facing, where the police are being protected, and that's the question the person asked, is do you think that the police union has a hand in enabling, protecting, and promoting the policies that lead to police brutality? So no matter how, we're talking about strengthening the people that are being oppressed, but let's talk about the people they feel they're being oppressed by. If they're being protected by that law so much, regardless of who made that law, we're living by that, right? How do you respond to that when they're being this closed system thing? When one person is doing something wrong, then you have to kind of, loyalty means you stand up and protect them. Is this something that is promoted in there?
So I mean, obviously, again, disclaimer, I can only talk about what's happened with me in the last 6 years. I will say that with body cameras, it's an amazing blessing. I've been 100% in support of it. When I first started, I did not have a body camera, and then I did. I have never experienced a situation where something has happened and I've had to step up to, quote unquote, protect somebody from something that they shouldn't be doing. In fact, my department has a policy where if you see any violation or any ethical situation occur in front of you, you have a duty to report it, or you'll be reprimanded. If not, given days of suspension without pay. So again, where there has to be some.
So why isn't that applied across the board, though? Why is it
exactly? So that is the biggest. That's what I've been saying from the beginning, that there are places that are doing it right, but it's not being acknowledged, and those places need to be used as examples. And even these places, there's an emergency legislation that was passed yesterday here of even more strict policies on top of us already having strict policies. They've removed, using tear gas and rubber pellets on protesters and things like that, which I'm full agreement of. There needs, and so even in a place where there's so much reform, so much, restrictions, now they've even added more. So places need to look at some of the major cities and see if they're doing things right or if they're doing things wrong. There are a lot of places where bad things are happening. I 100% agree. There's a lot of militaristic ways that people are being trained, which is wrong.
So that's what we're saying. So would you then agree that there is a system that is protecting the injustices? Would that be a fair judgment? If somebody had that conclusion, would that be a fair judgment? Because you're clearly saying that in those places, like where you are, police are not being given that protection, right? But then in other places they are, and it's affecting real lives, like George Floyd and many other people who are being killed, and then these people aren't facing justice. Then would it be then fair to say they're being protected by a system that is kind of maybe even encouraging it?
So I mean, again, like I'm not sure. All unions are different. Like I'm talking about police unions are different from locality, state, local townships, statewide. federal, be all these unions. There's no standard, and I think that is the main key. There needs to be a federal standard. There needs to be a set of guidelines where it's like, this is the rules, this is what needs to happen, and essentially everyone needs to abide by these. There needs to be an oversight committee. Like I said, there's an official police complaint, officer police complaint run here.
Right.
Even, like you can be investigated for, like I said, anything. So these type of things need to be federally applied across the board, even if you live in some small town in Louisiana, or if you live in Nebraska, Idaho, wherever. These places where these age-old systems are in place and no one has stepped up, dissected their general orders, their policies, and said that this is wrong. I mean, I'll be the first to admit, we're talking about policing in the Black community. I do not think arresting young Black men does anything. With the current culture, their parents, their fathers, their uncles, they're incarcerated, or they're dead, or they're hooked on drugs. So you have a community of young men and women who are looking at each other for guidance. They have no unity. They're listening to hip hop, to the culture, certain trap culture that's telling them, put down a basketball, put down a football, and pick up a pistol. And because of that, the police, the way that it's set up in the country, I go out, my job is to recover illegal firearms. And I've been doing it. Like I told you earlier, 589 guns recovered and zero police shootings involved.
We do have to acknowledge the great work that, police officers like yourself are doing. I mean, great. But this conversation is a little bit more about, like, I think one of the comedians and his kids mentioned that, there should be no room for any sort of, bad apples. Like, you can't have bad pilots. That means, just if American Airlines was to say every now and then we have crashes and it's okay, it's just a few apples that are bad, we can't have that in police department. And I agree.
Of course. I mean, I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying that where it's working, we as a Jamaat should step up, evaluate which departments are doing it right, and be the ambassadors, as I have done in the past. Every time I went back to see Azur didn't tell me stop being a police officer. He said, okay, that's nice. Go ahead and do another 2 more years. And I went back 3 times and he told me to continue to do it. So I'll continue to be the voice and carry my faith and be that ambassador. My coworkers, they know the difference when they see me. They know, they see the difference. They see that, we work as a family, there's diversity. These things, I completely agree that there's an issue, but we need to come together as a Jamaat and be the people that step in and write to these,
I'm sure that's what
these
makes it
lawmakers.
tough for you. Like, I know you personally, I know what you do out there, and there's a lot of great police officers out there. But then, if you were, let's say, in Minnesota, where you don't have the luxury of what you have in DC, maybe there's good policies there, then you would struggle. And I'm sure you'll agree with that. And coming to Abdullah, now, some people have argued that, the police officers that were involved in the unjust killing of George Floyd, now they face justice. Maybe the riot should not stop. They have what they want, what the and whatever. What they've been demanding for is justice. Now that there's justice, shouldn't they stop?
Yeah, I mean, right now they address the immediacy of the situation, and we can respect that. Nevertheless, this is going to happen again, and it's already happened within the time frame that the police officer was arrested and the other guys were arrested. There have already been, Black men who have been killed by the police. Right. And I just think that's the concern. And that's why I asked the question earlier, if a teacher and a student get into a physical fight, who is at fault? Right? I'm sure most of us would say the teacher. Now, if we ask that question again and we say, imagine if there was a fist fight between a police officer and a Black guy, what would most of us say, right? Most of us would probably say it was the Black guy's fault because he should have just complied and listened, right? That is not a comparable response, right? The educator is the professional. The educator is to serve that particular group of people and get the best out of them. And just to highlight what Aji, I've known Aji, first time we met was in 2013 at, I think it was a national Ijtima in Pennsylvania. Nevertheless, 0 gun shootings or 0 killings, 529 recovered illegal firearms. That has to do with conflict resolution and de-escalation. That's what that shows. That shows professionalism. And I'm interested to know the numbers before Aji got there, just to see how much that tahajjud and that Quran recitation influenced the whole situation, right? So, we need to get the numbers on that so we can do a little study. But just to go back and make a few points, again, it's not, the people who are looting isn't solely black people, right? We know what's going on with Antifa. We know what's going on here. There's been many instances where, black gun owners have went out and protected black-owned businesses or even major businesses, major corporate businesses, and said, look, you're not going to loot in here, right? Killer Mike has got up and, made a beautiful impromptu speech for 8.5 minutes telling people to strategize, mobilize, organize, so on and so forth. This is the Ahmadiyya movement. What they're talking about is the Ahmadiyya movement. And again, just a second, what Aji is talking about, we need to get out there and do that, right? This is the opportunity. I did have a question from somebody saying, what would the recompense be? We've already, did something.
We have 3 minutes, by the way. We have 3 minutes.
Okay.
For the whole program to end. So you have another 30 seconds.
All right. So, somebody asked what the recompense would be. We already had the civil rights movement. The simple thing is, it's exactly what Nipsey Hussle used to talk about. Access. We want access. That's all we want. We don't want quotas, right? We don't want you to allocate us money based off a quota and be your minority hire. We just want a fair shot, and we want the same access that you have as anybody has. That's all we want.
Okay, so Murabi Hamad, there was a question for you from Zarik. We've been encouraged to vote and to be law-abiding citizens. This question is, okay, if God forbid a government announce a vote, as have been speculated may have happened in November and has supposedly happened in Georgia yesterday, and those who enforce the law are not abiding by it, what is an Ahmadi Muslim, what is an Ahmadi who has been told to follow the law and participate in democracy to do? Obviously there's prayer, but how can we help beyond it? So the system is great.
It's a very good question, and it's a difficult question, and I'm going to be honest, it's difficult to answer and give you a real answer on that question, because I'm going to read you a hadith from Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and again, this is where, you can be like, he's just quoting Quran, Sunnah, hadith, but this is our guidance, right? This is what we as Ahmadi Muslims believe in. In a hadith of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, some companions came to the Messenger of Allah, and they said, we complained to Allah's Messenger of the persecution inflicted upon us by the infidels while he was sitting in the shade of the Kaaba, leaning over his covering sheet. We said to him, would you seek help for us? Would you pray to Allah for us? He said, among the nations before you, a believing man would be put in a ditch that was dug for him, and a saw would be put over his head, and he would be cut into 2 pieces. Yet that torture would not make him give up his religion. His body would be combed with iron combs that would remove his flesh from the bones and nerves, yet that would not make him abandon his religion. By Allah, this religion will prevail till a traveler from Sana'a in Yemen to Hadramaut will fear none but Allah, or as a wolf as regards his sheep, but you people are hasty. Now, yes, I understand this hadith is about religion and about Islam and persecution that early Muslims had to go through. But it does teach us the value of perseverance. It teaches us the value of when we are put through hardship under oppression, what our response should be. There's many other narrations when the companions ask Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that when we are under the rule of an oppressive ruler, what should we do? The Prophet would say, give your rights to Allah, Allah will give you your rights, and Allah will deal with the oppressing people. These are the situations where, and again, it sounds nice to say it's hard to do, and I know it may sound like a half answer, but this is the answer that comes from Quran, Sunnah, and Hadith, where we find that if we turn to Allah with patience, if we turn to Allah for our rights, if we cry to Allah, then that is when Allah will listen to our prayers. And I'm not saying it's going to be a one-day, one-night thing. Somebody sent me a question saying that, is the response of MDs, has it brought any changes in Pakistani government today? No, it hasn't. It's been 130, 40 plus years. It hasn't brought any changes, right? It's only been getting worse. But our response is continuously pray to Allah, be patient, and a day will come when maybe in our lives or our children's lives, this oppression, the persecution will end. And that's the faith we have to have, that we're spiritual people, we believe in Allah, we have to have faith in that God. We use all legal means possible, make those peaceful rallies, protests, strategize, mobilize, organize, vote, have all these movements, maybe ask people to run for office who are capable. But if the government is so oppressive, what option do we have is other than to turn to Allah? Then we have no other option. But violence, our faith is never the option. To go contrary to the law of the land is never the option. If we ever feel that we get to a point where we have to resort to violence, then the Quran says before you resort to that, migrate. That's what the Quran says. Before you get to the point of violence, migrate. Only if you cannot migrate, and literally there's no other option, then you can maybe resort to some sort of rebellion against your government. But it's to seek every possible peaceful, lawful means before you resort to violence. And we always have to have our eyes set on Allah.
I'm sure everyone, we're just scratching the surface here. 1 hour just really went by. I want to thank all of our panelists just to keep to the time. We're already 1 minute over time. You guys have given a lot of insight. Our brother Aji, who's out there right now, on duty, working, sparing your time, and of course, Murabi Hamad, I know you have to jump on a call. I really have to appreciate all of your time, all of your efforts that you've put in, and everyone else. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all the questions, but I think it's something that we may have to come back to make sure that we continue this conversation. It's something that somebody mentioned in the beginning as well. Will it just be one-off, or will it happen again? On that note, I think there's nothing on your end. I think we can end with silent prayers.
Imam Sahib, there's one thing that I wanted to do before we end up leaving. First of all, I wanted to appreciate everybody for being on this panel. This is something that we want to do on a weekly basis to virtually stay connected as well. My name is Azam Akram. I'm a missionary for the Jamaat, and I also serve in terms of doing these live sessions every Wednesday. And this week I had the honor of just calling all of these panelists out, and they did such a fantastic job. If I may, because it's the Tarbiyyat session, we have received guidance from our Imam, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, after guidance was sought. And I wanted to make sure that we can read this out to everyone. Imam Dibba Sahib, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Okay. So this is in response to respected Sadr Sahib, Mudil Abdullah Sahib, asking this question of Hazur about how we should proceed here in the United States of America. And Hazur responds back that respected Sadr Majlis Khudaun and the USA, Dr. Mudil Abdullah Sahib, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I hope and pray that you are in the best of health, Ameen. Kindly find below the latest instructions from Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, may Allah strengthen his hands, regarding the current protests and racial tensions that are happening in the United States of America. Hazur, Ayyadahullah Ta'ala Birasul Aziz, which basically is a prayer that may Allah strengthen his hands, has instructed. Ahmadi Khudam can take part in protests if they wish, but they must do so in a personal capacity. So this is foremost. Number two, if they do take part in the protest, then they should not take part in anything that is illegal or where violence or damage to personal or state property occurs. If peaceful protests show any sign of escalating, then they should remove themselves from the situation. Number three, given the current situation, not only is it morally wrong to take part in protests that lead to confrontations with authorities, it is also dangerous and could lead to Ahmadis taking part in being arrested or injured. Furthermore, if Ahmadis are involved in such extreme protests, even in a personal capacity, it reflects on the Jamaat and on the blessed name of the promised Messiah. Number four, both Amuri Kharjiya, which is the Public Affairs Department, and Khuddam administrations should seek to educate members that protests are of limited effect. There have been other marches and occasions or protests that have taken place back to the days of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but the problems remain systemic. They should be educated that to get the rights will require planning, mobilization, and long-term strategy, as the effects of protests are often short-term and limited. This was announced over and over again here. The real ways of affecting change requires more astute ways to pressure the authorities. For example, every member should be mobilized to use their civic and democratic rights rather than staying at home on election days. They in turn should encourage other citizens that if they want to affect change, then they should take part in the democratic process at all levels as this is the means to bring change and vote in people who will further their rights and their causes. We should also meet with state officials, national officials, consider ways in which, whilst remaining within the law, pressure can be placed so that the authorities are forced to act with justice. Number 5, if Khuddam want to hold some sort of a Khidmat-e-Khalq event in the name of justice for African Americans, then this is permissible. One way could be that Khuddam identify the real peaceful protests and go there and take lunches or snacks, etc. for the protesters or others who are there for a good cause. Number 6, instead of Black Lives Matter, try to promote Innocent Lives Matter or the supremacy of justice. There's no need for us to enter the debate regarding taking a knee where people are kneeling down in front of the national flag or when the anthem is played. This is a political gesture which we do not need to either condone nor condemn. Our actions, number 8, our actions as Ahmadi Muslims regarding the term Black Lives Matter will always be underpinned by the Islamic teachings. Thus, our statements and pronouncements are not only motivated by politics, but are also driven or derived from the Holy Quran and the life and teachings of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it is for this reason that better slogans when confronting these issues are Innocent Lives Matter and the supremacy of justice. The term Innocent Lives Matter, number 9, is inspired by the Quranic teachings that the murder of even one person innocent is akin to killing the whole of mankind, and the term supremacy of justice is inspired by the Quran's teaching that justice is paramount, and the farewell sermon of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, in which he said that a white person is not superior to a black person or an Arab to a non-Arab. Hence, this term rejects and refutes the claim of those people who consider that the white race has supremacy. Rather, it is justice that is supreme. And though we may get short-term popularity or credit by using the terms Black Lives Matter, it will mean that we are following a slogan designed for others for a political reason, and in the long term, there will be no benefit to this. Number 11, the 13 points. So number 11, for generations, Black people and other minorities have sought to get their right marches and protests, but it has not led to a systemic change. Thus, Ahmadis should recognize that success will be achieved through following the principles of the Islamic teachings and not by following the latest political trends. Consequently, in accordance to Islam, our campaigns and efforts should be focused on ensuring that Black people and other minorities take fully in all democratic processes, and they focus on being represented in all levels of government, law enforcement, and other sectors so that real change can occur. Number 12, some people quote the fact that Hazrat Muslim Maud conducted a rally for the people of Kashmir. However, this was a prelude to the real efforts that were made through diligent efforts and submissions at a committee level, which was where substantive changes were made. Number 13, supreme justice, justice supreme, may also be used as part of supremacy of justice campaign on social media to raise awareness effectively. I would be grateful if you could inform the relevant departments or office bearers of the instructions above. Jazakallah, prayers requested, wassalam, Hazur's Press Secretary, Abid Khan Saab. So with that, I just wanted to make sure that everybody's clear as to what our administration, our community body is governed by. And these were the 13 points that we were guided by our beloved Imam, Hazrat Khalifa al-Masih. I will turn it over to Imam Dibba Saab now. Murabi Saab, Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, appreciate that. Back to you. Let's just, we can end with dua. I think we've gone 10 minutes over time, if you want to. Imam, can you lead us in a silent prayer that may Allah Ta'ala enable us to help us understand
what's truly going on, and how we can be the catalyst for this amazing change that looks like that we're at the cusp of.
Dua, please. Ameen. Barakallah, everyone. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah.
Jazakallah.
So,
Assalamu alaikum.